You're out 50 grand, and you didn't have to pay her anything. Yes, sir.
What types of insurance policies are public? 'Cause I've heard that like umbrella policies can be publicly known and can make you a target.
Sometimes having too much insurance can make you a target. Sure, that's the kind of people they'll pick out. For that same reason, because if you get in front of a jury, everybody will feel like, what the hell? It's Aetna. They got all the money. They got more money than God. Let's get Aetna. You know, it's some people self-insure for that reason. Some doctors, I know some doctors who put the title of all their properties in their wife's house and their wife's name, and they don't get insurance, and that's the reason. And then they don't get sued very often because people quickly figure out they don't have anything. He doesn't own anything, he doesn't own a car, he doesn't own a house, he doesn't own any bank accounts, he doesn't have any money. What the hell good is it to sue him unless he's got a policy? So you're quite right, there's no question about it. You can make yourself a target by buying lots of insurance. But do you dare not doing that is the flip side. You know, I don't know where you draw that line. Yeah, and what is enough insurance? Is $1 million enough? Then you might wish you had 5 million. Or maybe you wish you had 10, but then they are a target. You know, and these are hairy issues, but they all come out of the liability of the owner of the premises to the public. And if somebody gets hurt there, somebody's going to pay for it. Yes, ma'am.
Does that liability change if you have like a sign that's written stated that if you trespass?
It can help. It can help. These are all factors for the jury to weigh. How responsible are you? We have in Florida a doctrine. It mostly is applicable in automobile accidents, but it's called comparative negligence. And what it's about is, in general, what percent of this is your fault? If the kid's damages really are $10 million for the rest of his life to be crippled, how much of that was your fault and how much was his fault? If it was 70% his fault for trespassing on your property, then you only pay $3 million. If it's 30% your fault as the property owner, you pay 30% of his damages and he eats 70% of his damage. There's a lot of fairness to that, as long as it's done right. But they do that in auto accidents. You know, you were following too close, yeah, but he turned around and pointed a pistol at me, you know. So, sure, I ran into the back of it, but he slammed on his brakes and shot me a bird, you know. Your Honor, whose fault is that? And then the jury allocates these percentages, okay? It was 40% his fault for slamming on his brakes, but it was 60% your fault for following too close. So that's how you allocate the damages, and they often apply to these personal injury cases. But it all kind of goes out the window when, as this gentleman has said, when they find out there's a big pot of gold with an insurance company. And the sad thing in Florida's PI law is it used to be a deep, dark secret. And now the courts have ruled that the injured party is allowed to discover whether or not you had coverage and what are the limits of your coverage. And since that's the case, now there's usually an insurance adjuster sitting there at the table anyway, because he knows, the jury already knows, that Aetna has a $5 million policy on this property. So he might as well be there telling the lawyer what to do, because he's paying for the defense anyway. But he's now paying for it openly because they know about him, rather than sitting in his office writing checks and you think it's the lawyer for the poor homeowner. You know, it's really the lawyer for the insurance company, because that's who's going to eat it. You know, I mean, assuming there's coverage. Now, let me go a step further with this. You may not be aware that liability insurance companies have secret, what's their word? Secret inspectors. They go around and look at homes to cancel policies. And the people they cancel, one of the first ones they cancel are people that have diving boards. This was a diving board case. If you have a diving board on your swimming pool, nobody will insure you. If you lied and said, I don't have a diving board, and the secret inspector who trespasses, we all know he does, but said the policy says he's allowed to, he comes and sneaks through your backyard and sees you have a diving board, boy, you get a notice in the mail, your policy canceled. That's it. It's on you now. Trampolines are huge. You have a trampoline? Nobody wants you. Somebody's going to get hurt. Not only somebody of your friend who got invited there, but some trespasser kid is gonna come over there and get hurt. And the company's gonna get sued, so they don't wanna cover you. So, that's not really relevant, except in the sense of understanding that there are certain types of risks that are so blatant that the insurance companies don't even wanna take these risks. Because you're gonna get tagged. They don't want to insure you if you have a pit bull. Why should they? Somebody's going to get bit, somebody's going to sue, they're going to have to pay for it. They can't charge you a big enough premium to make it worth the risk. Not only worth the risk, but worth the cost of having to provide the lawyer to defend the case. So, on the one hand, we say, yeah, let's just go buy some insurance and this is all cool and I can't get hurt. But it's never that simple. You're in a lawsuit, you're going to get deposed, you're going to get dragged to court. It's going to be a nightmare, it's going to waste years of your time and sleep and heartburn, even if it doesn't cost you anything, even if the insurance company paid the lawyer. They don't sue the insurance company, they sue you, the property owner. And you may or may not be able to get a policy based on what do you do on your piece of property. If you manufacture chlorine on your property, nobody's going to insure you. Chlorine gas is explosive, the thing's probably going to blow up. Can't get a policy at all. And who wants to be next door to that? You know, so a lot of these issues, it's not just as simple as, okay, who's going to pay? Because you may not be able to get insurance at all. There may be a reason that your policy didn't cover. Maybe the policy said, no Ferris wheels, and you put one in. And, you know, then you're not covered anyway. So and this is what we call them the PI lawyers do. You know, they drive their Porsches and wear their gold chains and drive around and fight over this kind of stuff and pass out their cards, and it happens. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna say, I handle homeowners and commercial liability litigation for the insurance carriers.
You've been through some of the stuff I'm saying makes some sense. I mean,
Yeah.
it's how we real estate lawyers talk about it, and I candidly, that's just because real estate lawyers don't like PI lawyers.
Right.
So, but I mean, those are the horror stories that we hear from our clients on how they get stung and how they have caught people bringing banana peels into the shopping centers. I mean, their own banana peels.
I have videos.
You have videos of that happening? Okay.
In this particular case example, this would end up settling in mediation.
Okay. The insurance company would go ahead and pay, is what you're saying?
They would eventually go ahead and pay, but it would be comparative.
Yeah, they would, if it was trespassing, they would want to reduce the payment. Is what
They
you're saying?
look at the age of Matt.
Mhm.
They would look at the fact that, okay, he's trespassing now, but he had a reasonable expectation that he could go onto your property
And be safe.
because he had been there
Okay.
so many
Good.
times before.
Great. Now, this is great input. This is exactly the kind of stuff that I love to hear from all you guys. If you have a life experience that sheds on what we're doing here, for God's sake, share it with us, because we're all going to learn from that. That's good stuff. And that's, as we talked about earlier, that's one of the 99 out of 100 cases that never got to court or settled if it did get to court.
I've only had one case. I've been an adjuster for about 30 years. I've only had one case that actually went through the court process.
Wow.
I've had many that settle on the court steps on the way into.
Okay, and a lot of them even settle, as I understand it, before the jury comes back. How did the trial look? What do we think's going to happen
Right.
here? You know,
And
that's a little silly in the sense that that's just all about gambling. You've already spent all the money now. You know, now it's just a question of what's coming back. You know, but
yeah, many of them settle literally on the court steps on the way in.
on the way in to
On
the
the
trial
way
the first
in.
day. Okay,
Right.
yeah, it makes people get a lot more reasonable because all of a sudden you may get zip or you may get 10 million and you don't know, and it's in the hands of that jury.
And then with regards to mediation, I've walked out of many mediations, but they've settled the next day or within the next week. If we've had somebody with unreasonable expectations, you just walk out of mediation.
That makes them get reasonable.
And
Yeah.
they get reasonable
Okay.
really quickly.
We didn't talk about it, and I'd like to focus on mediation for 2 seconds. Back to mediation, something I didn't mention, but your experience there is relevant. When we had our foreclosure crisis in the 2008-9 recession, you know, everybody lost their jobs, foreclosures, losing their homes. Our courts said that every foreclosure against a residential piece of property had to go to mediation before they could proceed with the foreclosure. Now, that wasn't in the mortgage documents, that wasn't in a contract, that's not in the statutes. The Supreme Court of Florida just imposed a rule that said if you want to use our courts and you want to foreclose your mortgage in our courts, before you can have a foreclosure judgment and go sell that guy's house, you're going to have a mediation. Here's what happened. All the banks decided, okay, you can make us go. And they all went. And they didn't give 5 cents. They just sat there and said, yeah, life's a bitch. You're losing your house. What are you going to do about it? Yep, Your Honor, we went to mediation. A year later, the Supreme Court pulled the whole program. It was a great idea. We all became licensed as mediators. Hell, I got a mediator's license and handled a bunch of those cases. Not a single one ever settled. Because the banks just stole. You can make us come, but you can't make us give an inch. Because we're going to win that case. There's no defense to a mortgage foreclosure. We're going to get your house. You didn't make the payments, we're going to get your house. So why should we cave here and say, okay, I'll take 80%? Public purpose and spirit of compromise and all that stuff would have been wonderful, but we're the banks. You can't tell us what to do. We're bigger than you are, Florida, and your Florida courts. So we'll wait you out. Make me lose 3 months in mediation, that's fine. We'll see you. 3 months later, we'll finish our foreclosure. So, yeah, these procedures are all wonderful and they all make sense. And some parties get reasonable, and some parties, like the banks, they don't care. Go ahead, mediate me for months if you want to. I'm going to win. But those are great comments, and that's the kind of thing I'd love to encourage from everybody. If you've got something you can share with us about how you apply this stuff, I'd love to hear it. Yes, sir.
Actually, I have a question about the, I know you said something about the doctors kind of putting the properties in their wife's name and things like that. Is there any type of...
Put the properties in what? Their
properties
wife's
in their
name?
wife's name, you know, to kind of avoid the, you know, the legal aspects of things?
Well, that was for doctors getting sued for their professional practice. That, we're not talking about getting sued for the guy. You know, if the kid gets hurt on the wife's property, they're going to sue the wife.
Right.
That's a different issue. I mean, that's the issue we're talking about here.
Right.
But the issue we were talking about was whether you have so much insurance you're a target.
Okay.
If you don't have any assets, you don't need any insurance.
Right. I was saying from like an owner standpoint, right? Is there any type of legal structure to kind of hide, besides, you know, the whole LLC thing, like can you put in a land trust and kind of have the LLC as the beneficiary?
We're going to talk about those things in a different chapter.
Okay.
We're going to talk about how you structure your ownership of real property and whether it creates what's called a liability shelter or not. And that's LLCs and limited partnerships and corporations and stuff like that. And they can, to some extent, they can protect you individually. You still, the asset is still at risk, but maybe not you. For example, in our example here, if the only asset this guy had is the house, if he had no money, you know, the guy who had a swimming pool, if he had no money, he didn't have a penny, but he owned this house. Well, the worst you can ever do is just take his house away. Even if it was a $50,000 house, but the kid got hurt for $10 million. If all he has is an asset, that's all you're ever going to get, if there's no insurance. So the point is, what we're saying is, you can insulate yourself to the extent that the property is exposed and somebody can get the property. But the issue is, can they get the rest of their money from you personally? That's a different issue. And we'll talk about that.
And isn't it,
No, sorry, go ahead. I think you're first.
I was just gonna say, does the homestead exemption protect you? Protect your property from a judgment?
We're going to talk about homestead exemption at length. Yeah, to some extent, homestead exemption can protect you on this case for your one homestead. Not for your office building, not for your shopping center, you commercial developers. We're not talking about here you as your owner of the home. We're talking about you guys in the real estate business and your investment properties and your commercial ventures and all that stuff. And homestead exemption is not going to do you any good there. Yeah. I'm sorry, yeah, excuse me.
My question was on there.
Okay.
And-
Let's talk.
But to that, I'm
Sure.
sorry, just to follow up, but to that extent, if your properties are under a LLC,
Uh-huh.
does that limit the liability, or can they still come after you personally?
No.
It's a corporate.
We're going to talk about that at length, but the concept is simply this. If the LLC can be liable,
Right.
but if the only asset the LLC has is the piece of property, that's all you can lose.
Okay.
We're going to talk about all the reasons why every deal you do, you want to do in a different entity, in a different LLC, in a different limited partnership. So when somebody gets hurt there, the worst they can do is take all the assets of that LLC, which is just that piece of property, and that piece of property, but not all your other assets. And that's why if you individually own 100 things, and this kid gets hurt, if he gets a big enough judgment, he gets all of your 100 things. But if you limit it to this LLC owns this piece, so we're going to talk about single asset entities, so that if somebody gets hurt, the worst they can do is take that one piece of property. That's bad. They get your whole shopping center maybe, but they don't get your other $100 million in your other shopping centers, conceptually. So as it applies individually, but also as to if you have a corporation, you don't want it to own 7 shopping centers, because whoever gets hurt on this one, you're exposed on the other 6. You try to have a separate entity for each one, but there are a lot of rules that you got to be really careful, and you got to keep them separate and independent. You lump them all together as one, then a smart lawyer says, I'm shooting at the whole lot. You know? I mean, when you have holding companies and they're all lumped together and managed together and same stationery, same bank accounts and all that kind of stuff, then they're not really separate anymore. You gotta not just own it separately. You gotta be smart and manage it separately. Yeah, I mean, keep them all independent as can be, so that clearly you only got hurt by this one. You didn't get hurt by this one. Okay, I want to go into one more time the changing landscape paragraph at the end of this chapter, and it doesn't relate an awful lot to the things that we just talked about. It just happens to be in this chapter, and it happens to be good stuff that I want us to explore a little bit and think about. It's about, and again, just like I said, these 3 concepts are important, but they don't really have anything to do with mineral rights and water rights. This stuff doesn't have anything to do with any of these things we just talked about, except it's the concept of stewardship. And as we stumble through some of these things, I want to talk about stewardship, which is your responsibility as an owner of a piece of property, as an environmental steward. You're the custodian of this property, and you have ethical obligations to do the right thing. To others in the world, to other pieces of property, to the environment, etc. And this is not just Democratic talk, this is green talk that you guys need to be aware of, and in the future, people are going to be looking at you as a developer and be critical of what you do with your land. And this course is entitled, as you know, Real Estate Law and Ethics, and to the extent we can and when we can, I want to focus on these concepts, and this section brings it up real well. This says, as we start out in the first paragraph, when someone uses the term real estate, we think of developers and brokers and factories, etc. And they all think of real estate as the economic things and the economic wealth that they generate. And sure, we talked about earlier, land's only worth what can you do with it? Can you lease it, sell it, and all those nice economic things. But there's a great comment here by the CEO of the Nature Conservancy. I've got a lot of friends who are on the board of the Nature Conservancy, and he had this comment. In the end, our society will be defined not only by what we create, but by what we refuse to destroy. This is tree hugger, and this is don't wipe out the Everglades and build houses, and by what we refuse to destroy. section goes on to talk about a book called The Land Ethic, and the fact that Americans don't normally have an ethical approach to land. We look at it as to monetary and what can it do for us, and we don't see ourselves as custodians of the land for the future, for our children, for our grandchildren, for other people to be around, to smell, to hear, as we talk about nuisances, doing the right thing with your property. The next paragraph I think is spectacular. When we seek approval for a development and we're asked the question by the city commissioners, what is on the land? How many owners, having no prior construction existing on the site, would respond? Nothing. Leopold would respond by describing the soil, the water, the plants, the animals. The land ethic, he argues, simply enlarges the boundaries of our human community to encompass these other elements. If that was done, persons owning the land and ones approving the development would examine the ecological, the economic, and the aesthetic characteristics of the land. This is coming. This is coming when you look at what they tried to do at Bahia Mar and build these 2 40, 50-story hotels. And everyone in Idlewild had to look at them. Aesthetically, what is that going to do? And taking that a step further, that people didn't think, Bahia Mar is owned by the city. That's city land. You're going to let these idiots build 50-story condominiums on city land for us all to look at and try to drive our cars through and have to compete with for utilities and compete with for the resource use of our beaches? They're going to start viewing stuff this way. Governmental bodies, you have a whole separate class on governmental regulation of land development. Some of you may have had it, you're going to have it. Compatibility is a big issue. How compatible are things with the surrounding properties? And that's aesthetics. We have golf courses that have burrowing owls on them. I'm not suggesting that we should eliminate guys playing golf, but I am suggesting that we got to be careful. If the burrowing owls go away, what goes away next? The osprey go away, and all the birds go away. Is that a good thing? I don't think so. And if the trees go away, there definitely can't be any birds. So, you as owner of land, in my mind, have a stewardship obligation to all of us to do the right thing with that piece of land. It's good for all of us. We got to have factories somewhere, but they don't have to be in residential areas. It's funny, we all talk about churches. It's great to have a church, but do you want it next door to you? Nobody does. Everybody bitches, and then the churches grow and get bigger and bigger, and they build gymnasiums and they build schools, and everybody says, what? My neighborhood church? Now they're the developer gorilla. But it's the same, it's a extension of the same concept. What are we going to do with our land? How many people can we benefit by it? Are we just going to benefit one fat cat? Or can we benefit more people than that? I want you to think about those thoughts, and I'll see you next week. And next week, for those of you who missed, I'm sorry, sure you won't have to watch this on the tape, we are going to have 4 sessions of 4.5 hours next week. We're going to meet from 6, we all agreed we're going to start at 6 o'clock, and we're going to meet till 10:30 for 4 of our classes, because we have to make up 2 more hours. We only have 4 hours at course times 7, that's 28 hours. We have to come up with 30 hours. And we can meet some other time for 2 hours, but the majority seem to think, and I think it's better to add a half an hour 4 times to our classes, and that'll make our 30 hours. So our 2nd and 3rd classes will be 6 to 10:30. Our 5th and 6th classes will be from 6 to 10:30. And the others will be, of course, from 6 to 10, and that'll get us 30 hours. See you next week. Thank you. Thank you, Frederick. Thank you very much. And I have your ticket, right? Yes. There you go. Yeah. That one? Beach Place? Beach Place. No, that's cool. It's a shopping center on the beach. And it's 3 blocks north of Los Angeles. So I didn't know. So what are you hotel, restaurants and shops. And then, this is the beach. I mean, this is A1, and here's the beach. This is a shopping center. 3 stories of stores, restaurants, retail. Parking garage out back. 30 story. A friend of mine's a lawyer who did it. His first one that was done in Oregon. I haven't done it. It's the only one I know of where it has You'll find the address. You go into the property appraiser with the address. Yeah. Once you know where it is, you drive down the beach and you'll see it says beach. Out here on the front it says beach.
Minus 10% on beach.
My pleasure. Thank you. I enjoy talking to you.
I see you next week.
It's like I lost 25. It's like I paid 25. So, alright. And I got the AL.
Yeah, that'd be it.
Tell me your name.
Oh, I'm George.
Jordan? Great. Yeah, you wrote it.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'll be in out before I get out. The midterm. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, is the 6th edition of this book good, or do we need to have the 8th edition?
You can limp by with it. Let me
Yeah,
tell you the really
shit.
problem. I mean, I have no question.
I'm gonna like follow along page by page.
Well,
Most of the class.
only to the extent we did the
You're gonna get that name.
That's all we're gonna do. What you're gonna find if you have the 6th edition,
Land use class.
you'll have 95%. I have an old 6th edition. I just haven't prepared the new book, you know. And I used to teach from the 6th edition, the 7th and the 8th, and now there's a 9th edition. Almost, say to you is 99% of the stuff is identical. But what's going to happen is when I tell you to look at page 95, you're not going to find it. So when I tell you what it is, you look at a few pages, you may find it. And there's the chapter orders have changed a little bit. You can get a 6 pick and choose. Me, I'd do it.
Yeah, it's about half the price. It's like
Yeah.
30 versus
Yeah, I'd do it. Candidly, you want to focus on what you can get quickly too, because you don't want to end up 3 weeks behind trying to write 300. Yeah, but I mean, sure, if I think I saw some 6 where they were in paperback for like $3 or 30 cents or something stupid. And, you know, they're probably a mess, but I mean, they're out there. The 7th, you can certainly use. The 7th is almost, I mean, I know the 7th is virtually identical because I used it recently. I've only used this 8th for like 2 years. I used the 7th for a couple of years. And I used the 6th. Fred Forgy has got a 9th now.
Oh.
And someday we're going to compare them, but I read the table of contents. It's the same. Yeah,
I guess I'm mostly doing all
vocabulary is the same. Vocabulary comes from 300 years ago. You know, mediation and arbitration, they may not be covered as heavily in that book because the 6th edition is going to be 15 years ago. They'll be on there, but we talk about the class. You know, newer concepts may not be there. Air rights may not be there as to this concept. They may be there for airplanes over. You know, maybe the airplane back then. So it's going to be a little bit stale, but I don't know.
I wanted to actually ask you about the midterm.
Yeah.
I was able, if I'm able to come earlier, not saying you didn't have to get here, but I think maybe
I might have to log into an extension, that's why I'm
Yeah, Fred's usually here. I've done it before with students in this class. I have sent it to Fred, and Fred has sent them down there, and they've done it.
So they're like taking
If I were you, is, as I said a minute ago, as I said earlier on, it's also going to cover the stuff that we cover in class.
Drive safely.
So that's going to be a little.
But now I think that they
how
have
many
freaking long in a
Yes,
meeting.
you will.
Yeah.
I said 3 hours of class and an hour of exam,
That's
so you may
it.
miss 3 hours of
Is
class
it part of the garage?
It's gonna be on the exam.
Always up front.
I see.
because I wanna cover that stuff on
Yeah, you pay
midterm.
for
If
it.
I don't, I don't quite have enough
Yeah, but
material
it's
to
so
cover
far.
on midterm, frankly. So that, I mean, I thought, that was my first thought when you said, can I take it before the class? Yeah, but you probably better hear the class first.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
So,
Like YOLO?
how long are you
YOLO?
waiting?
Yeah.
I think we went
That
to
weekend,
31.
I'll be there Sunday.
Maybe you could take the rest on Monday. Could you do that?
If you're okay with it, that'd be great.
Sure.
I'll watch the video on the way.
That's what I get, the videos, assuming the video's posted the next day.
Wednesday.
In the parking lot?
No, the one I'm talking about is like
Somebody
Wednesday.
walk that way?
I'm okay with
I was
that.
like, on my way back.
No,
Like, did you bring it to
Get
the
seconds.
Where is it?
I may or may not get the second test.
I'm sorry.
Well,
I-
anyway, I really appreciate you letting me take it on.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
You were the only one being hospitalized by yourself. Then you're just not.
I'll make sure I won't be the only one.
Bridget, hi, I'm Steve. I'm glad to meet you. Did you give me one of these?
I surely finished it, didn't I?
I'm awful that way, I'm not used to doing anything by myself.
Only reason I ask is I know I'm short. I had 12 people, and I know I don't have 12 of these yet. Are you 2 pages? Man, you must have done a lot of good stuff.
I copied and pasted from my president.
Huh?
I copied and pasted from my president. It was already written, why rewrite it again?
That's cool. Bridget, thank you very much, and I'll staple those two together. I'm glad
Oh,
you get to meet
really, I
you.
remember
Glad
the
you get to meet you.
sentences,
Yes.
Wait, what was this for?
Say that again?
the paper he
Have
said,
you on our
for
class?
us to fill out, like, what experience we had.
Not actually questions, a statement. I have to travel next week for work.
Huh?
I'll be in
Right, I
Chicago.
do have a copy of my resume.
Okay,
Unfortunately, I'm gonna miss your class.
that's all right. That's what those are for. I'm
Perfect.
supposed to turn that on.
So I wanted to give you a heads up.
Second.
I'll send you an email just
But,
as.
oh, really?
That's cool. That would be good if you would, just so I won't look around and think, where is she? And that way I'll remember it. But, no, it happens. That's what Jordan was talking about. He has to be out on the 4th class, and he's gonna have to make up the midterm. It has to happen. Stuff happens. People are gonna get sick, people have weddings, it happens. Don't worry about it.
All right.
I'll see you the week after,
Yes.
and, Fred usually posts this within a day
The
or
night,
so.
yeah, it's normally
Yeah.
up the very next day.
It's pretty, is it that quick? Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Bridget.
Computer's so little.